I stood in the dimly lit management office of Riverside Luxury Apartments, watching them through the security monitor as they toured Penthouse 7B. Nathan's hand rested comfortably on the small of Melissa's back, guiding her through the open concept living area with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. My husband, ex-husband as of 3 months ago, and my former best friend, admiring the crown molding and Brazilian hardwood floors I had specifically selected during the recent renovation. Grace, the leasing agent, was enthusiastically highlighting the kitchen's marble waterfall island and custom cabinetry, unaware that I had personally approved each fixture, each finish. Unaware that I owned the entire building. The application, "Looks perfect, Ms. Thompson," said Kevin, the property manager, sliding the paperwork across the desk toward me. "Your company's acquisition of Riverside was completed just in time. These are our first applicants for the penthouse since the renovation." I signed where indicated, authorizing the lease agreement for Nathan and Melissa. "Thank you, Kevin. And remember, it's imperative they don't know who owns the building." Kevin nodded, confusion briefly crossing his face. "Of course. Thompson Realty Group will remain anonymous as the parent company, standard procedure for all our properties." Standard procedure, perhaps, but this was anything but standard. What Nathan and Melissa didn't know, couldn't know, was that the careful life they were building together was now unfolding in a property I controlled completely. The same property that Nathan had once dismissed as a risky investment when I'd mentioned interest in it during our marriage. On the monitor, I watched Melissa run her hand along the quartz countertop, her diamond ring catching the light. The same diamond that had been on my finger for 8 years. She turned to Nathan with a radiant smile, whispering something that made him laugh. I remembered that laugh, remembered when it had been meant for me. "They'll be signing the lease tomorrow morning," Kevin confirmed, closing the file. "Perfect timing," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I believe I'll be making some necessary building inspection visits beginning next week." What the happy couple didn't know was that the comfortable life they'd constructed, built, on betrayal and deceit, was now subject to my oversight in ways they couldn't imagine. And I, Rebecca Thompson, former Chief Operations Officer of Evergreen Financial Partners and now owner of Thompson Realty Group, had spent 3 months ensuring they would never see what was coming. 6 months ago, I had everything I thought I wanted. Nathan and I had just celebrated our 8th anniversary with a trip to Bali. Our careers were thriving, and we'd finally begun serious discussions about starting a family. Our Tudor-style home in Oakwood Heights was the envy of our social circle, a circle that included Melissa Chen, my best friend since college. "I still can't believe you got the Henderson account," Melissa said, pouring me another glass of wine, on my patio one Friday evening. The spring air was fragrant with blooming jasmine, and I felt completely content. Nathan's connection with Will Parker helped, but honestly, I closed that deal myself. I couldn't keep the pride from my voice. The Henderson account would likely lead to my promotion to partner at Evergreen Financial. "You two are just the perfect power couple," Melissa sighed, tucking her sleek black hair behind her ear. "Meanwhile, my dating life is a disaster and my design business is barely staying afloat." That was the night I'd suggested Melissa could redesign our guest house as a portfolio piece to attract higher-end clients. "You can showcase your work, and we get a beautifully designed space. Win-win." Nathan had been surprisingly enthusiastic about the idea when I mentioned it later that night. "Mel could use the help, and you're always saying the guest house needs updating," he'd agreed, kissing my forehead before returning to his financial reports. What extraordinary timing they'd had, I would later realize. Melissa began working on our guest house just as Nathan's department at Evergreen faced restructuring, just as I was being considered for partnership, just as I'd inherited a substantial sum from my uncle's estate. The late nights I spent at the office gave Melissa and Nathan plenty of time alone. I'd assumed she was working on design plans, I'd assumed he was helping her with her struggling business finances. I'd assumed our marriage was solid. I discovered the truth in the most mundane way possible. There was no dramatic confrontation, no lipstick on his collar, no suspicious text message. Instead, it was a simple banking notification, an unusually large transfer from our joint account to Melissa's business account. The amount made no sense, far more than we'd agreed to invest in the guest house renovation. When I called Nathan's office to ask about it, his assistant Jennifer sounded confused. "Mr. Thompson is out today. He called in sick this morning." But Nathan wasn't sick. He wasn't even home. When I called Melissa to ask if she'd seen him, her phone went straight to voicemail. That's when I first felt it, that cold trickle of doubt sliding down my spine. I left work early and drove home, only to find Nathan's car in our driveway. Next to it was Melissa's distinctive red Mini Cooper. For several minutes, I sat in my car, staring at our beautiful home, trying to formulate innocent explanations. Perhaps they were discussing the guest house budget. Perhaps he'd come home sick and called her for some reason. The guest house lights were off. The main house lights were on, specifically the master bedroom light. I still remember how calm I felt walking through my own front door, climbing my own stairs. It was like watching someone else moving through the space, someone detached and steady. The sounds from the bedroom were unmistakable. I didn't need to open the door. Instead, I quietly retreated downstairs, poured myself a glass of the expensive Scotch Nathan saved for special occasions, and sat at our kitchen island. I pulled out my laptop and began reviewing our financial records, methodically documenting every unusual transaction over the past 6 months. There were many. When they finally came downstairs 2 hours later, laughing about something, they froze at the sight of me sitting calmly at the kitchen island. "Becca," Nathan stammered, his face draining of color. "You're home early." Melissa couldn't meet my eyes, her gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. The woman I'd trusted with everything, vacations together, shared holidays, countless secrets, couldn't even look at me. "How long?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady. "Becca, it's not what you think." Melissa finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. 5 months, Nathan admitted simultaneously, contradicting her attempted denial. "It just happened, Becca. We never meant to." "To what? To sleep together in our bed? To embezzle from our joint accounts?" I turned my laptop toward them, displaying the spreadsheet I'd compiled. "To lie to my face every single day for nearly half a year?" What followed was surprisingly civilized. Nathan claimed they'd fallen in love unexpectedly. Melissa cried that she never meant to hurt me. Both insisted their feelings were genuine, overwhelming, impossible to deny. "I want you both out of my house tonight," I said finally. "And Nathan, I'll be contacting a divorce attorney in the morning." "But the house is in both our names," Nathan protested, suddenly concerned with practicalities. "And nearly all our assets are joined." I smiled then, the first genuine reaction I'd had since making my discovery. "Yes, they are. For now." The following weeks were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Nathan moved into Melissa's small apartment while I remained in our home. The divorce proceedings began with predictable acrimony, Nathan's attorney arguing for an equal division of assets, including the house he'd now decided he wanted. What Nathan didn't know was that I'd been methodically documenting his financial infidelity alongside his romantic betrayal. The unauthorized transfers to Melissa's business account, the secret credit card he'd opened in both our names, the suspicious movement of funds that coincided perfectly with their affair's timeline. "He's trying to hide assets," Tyler Wilson, my attorney, confirmed as we reviewed the financial disclosures in his downtown office. The space was all leather and mahogany, old money and confidence. "Classic move, but he's not particularly good at it. Nathan always thought he was smarter than everyone else," I replied, signing the counterfiling Tyler had prepared. Especially me. Well, his overconfidence is our advantage, Tyler smiled, adding the documents to our growing file. But Rebecca, I have to ask, are you sure you want to pursue the Riverside Luxury Apartments acquisition right now? Divorces are expensive, and that's a significant investment. The question was reasonable. Purchasing a 24-unit luxury apartment, building while in the middle of divorce proceedings might seem reckless. But I discovered something Nathan had overlooked. My uncle's inheritance wasn't just liquid assets. He'd left me his controlling interest in a property development company with significant real estate holdings across 3 states. I'm certain, I said. In fact, I want to accelerate the timeline. Tyler raised an eyebrow but nodded. Your finances, your decision. We'll keep this separate from the divorce proceedings, of course. That afternoon, I met with Diane Roberts, my new partner in Thompson Realty Group. We'd worked together at Evergreen for years before both leaving to form our own company, using my inheritance as startup capital. Riverside is officially on the market. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Diane confirmed, sliding the property portfolio across the table at Magnolia Coffee Shop. The current owner is motivated to sell quickly and quietly. But Becca, are you sure about this? It's not just the money. This property would require significant attention during renovation. I'm sure, I replied, studying the photos of the elegant but dated property. And I want to prioritize renovating the penthouse units first, specifically 7B. Diane gave me a curious look. Any particular reason? I sipped my latte, considering how much to reveal. Diane was my business partner, not my confidant. Let's just say I have a specific vision for that unit. What I didn't tell Diane was that I'd overheard Nathan and Melissa discussing their future plans at the Lakeside Grill the previous evening. I hadn't meant to spy on them. I'd been meeting a client when they were seated at a nearby table, unaware of my presence. Once the divorce is finalized, we should find a place together, Melissa had said. Somewhere fresh, with no memories. I've always liked those Riverside apartments, Nathan had replied. Once we sell the house and settle everything, we could afford the penthouse. Hearing them planning their future together, in a building they had no idea I was about to purchase, had crystallized my evolving plan. Some might call it revenge. I preferred to think of it as poetic justice. The acquisition of Riverside Luxury Apartments proceeded with remarkable efficiency. The previous owner accepted our first offer, eager to divest before an economic downturn. The property management company, including Kevin Chen, was retained to maintain the appearance of continuity. Kevin Chen? I'd asked when reviewing the staff list. Any relation to Melissa Chen? Her brother, Diane confirmed. Is that a problem? It wasn't a problem. It was an opportunity. Kevin had never met me. Melissa had kept her professional and personal lives separate, and our social gatherings had never included her family. Kevin knew of Nathan only as Melissa's new boyfriend, not as my soon-to-be ex-husband. Not at all, I assured Diane. But let's make sure all ownership documents list the company, not my personal name. Meanwhile, the divorce proceeded exactly as Tyler had predicted. Nathan's attempts to hide assets were flagged by the court. His unauthorized use of joint funds, particularly those transferred to Melissa, weakened his position considerably. The judge was unsympathetic to his claims, especially after evidence emerged that he'd been planning his exit from our marriage for months. Ms. Thompson will retain full ownership of the marital home and her separate inherited assets. The judge ruled. Mr. Thompson will keep his personal retirement accounts and vehicle. Nathan was livid, his face flushed with anger as we left the courtroom. This isn't over, Becca, he hissed. You've ruined me. No, Nathan, I replied calmly. You did that yourself. 3 days after the divorce was finalized, renovation began on Penthouse 7B at Riverside. I personally selected every fixture, every finish, creating a space that represented everything Nathan had ever said he wanted in a home. The open floor plan he'd always admired, the chef's kitchen he'd coveted in design magazines, the walk-in closets he'd complained were missing in our Tudor home. "We've had several inquiries about the penthouse already," Kevin reported during our weekly management meeting. "Word is spreading about the renovation." "I want to be selective about tenants," I instructed. "Professional couples preferred. Strong income verification." 2 weeks later, Kevin called with news that made all my careful planning worthwhile. "You won't believe who just toured Penthouse 7B and submitted an application," he said, excitement in his voice. "My sister Melissa and her boyfriend Nathan. They both have excellent credit and income. It would be great to have family in the building." I smiled into the phone, maintaining a professional tone. "That's wonderful, Kevin. Please process their application according to standard procedures." "Of course," he agreed. "Though I should mention they're actually getting married next month. Small ceremony, just close friends. They've been through a lot. Nathan had a messy divorce recently." "Congratulations to them," I replied smoothly. "Please let me know when the lease is ready for final approval." I hung up and walked to my window, looking out at the city below. So Melissa and Nathan were getting married. The woman who had broken the sacred trust of friendship and the man who had violated our marriage vows were formalizing their relationship built on betrayal. And they had chosen, of all places, to begin their new life in a property I controlled completely. Perfect. The day Nathan and Melissa moved into Penthouse 7B was unseasonably warm for early autumn. I watched from my car across the street as they directed movers carrying their possessions, including several pieces of furniture from our marital home that Nathan had been awarded in the settlement. The sectional sofa we'd purchased in Milan, the artisan dining table that had hosted countless dinner parties. I recognized some of Melissa's designer pieces as well, the vintage armchair she'd lovingly reupholstered, the abstract paintings she'd collected, all now arranged in a space I had meticulously designed, in a building I owned, under terms I controlled. "The lease agreement has a few special clauses," I'd instructed Kevin. "Annual inspections of all electrical and plumbing systems, quarterly, pest control treatments, building staff access for regular maintenance checks. All perfectly reasonable requirements, all providing me with legal access to their home on a predictable schedule." I waited 2 weeks before making my first official appearance at Riverside in my capacity as property owner. I dressed carefully that morning, a sleek charcoal pantsuit, subtle makeup, hair pulled back in a professional chignon. Nothing like the softer looks I'd favored during my marriage. This was Rebecca Thompson, real estate entrepreneur, not Becca, Nathan's wife. The lobby of Riverside gleamed with the results of our renovation. Marble floors, elegant lighting, a tasteful security desk where a uniformed attendant greeted residents by name. "Ms. Thompson," Kevin welcomed me, clearly nervous about the owner's first official inspection. "Everything is prepared for your tour. Let's start with the recently renovated units," I suggested casually. "The penthouses, specifically." Kevin led me through the building, proudly pointing out improvements and introducing me to staff. As we rode the elevator to the top floor, I maintained a pleasant, professional demeanor while my heart pounded against my ribs. "We'll start with 7A, which is currently unoccupied," Kevin said as the elevator doors opened. "Then move to 7B, where my sister and her husband live. I've notified all occupied units about today's inspection." 7 minutes later, Kevin knocked on the door of 7B. I stood slightly behind him, clipboard in hand, the perfect picture of a detached property owner. The door opened, and there stood Melissa, her expression shifting from annoyance to shock as she registered my presence. She wore casual loungewear, her hair piled messily atop her head, clearly not expecting company of consequence. "Kevin?" How she managed, her eyes fixed on me. What's going on? Monthly inspection, Kevin replied cheerfully, oblivious to her distress. This is Ms. Thompson, the building owner. Ms. Thompson, this is my sister, Melissa. Pleasure, I said, extending my hand with a cordial smile. Beautiful unit you have here. Melissa's hand trembled as she automatically reached to shake mine. Becca, she whispered. I don't understand. Rebecca Thompson, I corrected smoothly. Thompson Realty Group. I believe your lease agreement specifies regular inspections? We won't take much of your time. Kevin glanced between us, confusion evident. Do you two know each other? We've met, I replied, before Melissa could respond. May we come in, Mrs. Thompson? We have several units to inspect today. The use of her new surname, my former surname, landed exactly as intended. Melissa flinched but stepped aside wordlessly. The penthouse was immaculate, exactly as I'd designed it. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city skyline. Custom cabinetry gleamed in the morning light. Nathan and Melissa had arranged their furniture precisely how I'd imagined they would, following the natural flow of the space I'd created for them. The renovation turned out beautifully, I commented, making notes on my clipboard. Are you finding everything functional? Any issues with the appliances or systems? Melissa seemed incapable of speech, following us in stunned silence, as Kevin enthusiastically pointed out features I had personally selected. My sister's an interior designer, Kevin said proudly. She's added some beautiful touches already. Yes, I'm familiar with Melissa's work, I replied. Quite intimate knowledge, actually. Before Melissa could respond, the front door opened, and Nathan walked in, carrying a grocery bag in one arm and a bouquet of lilies, Melissa's favorite flowers, in the other. Mel, they were out of the goat cheese you wanted, so I got the... He stopped abruptly, the grocery bag slipping from his grip and thudding to the floor. Oranges rolled across the imported tile I'd selected. For a long moment, nobody moved. Kevin looked bewildered by the sudden tension. Nathan stared at me as though seeing a ghost. Melissa seemed on the verge of tears. I broke the silence with professional courtesy. Mr. Thompson, I presume? I'm Rebecca Thompson of Thompson Realty Group, the owner of Riverside Luxury Apartments. We're conducting the inspection specified in your lease agreement. Nathan's expression cycled rapidly through shock, confusion, and dawning comprehension. You bought this building, he said flatly. You're our landlord. Thompson Realty Group owns the building, I corrected, gesturing to my clipboard. I'm simply conducting today's inspection. Everything appears to be in excellent condition. We won't take up any more of your time. I turned to leave, but Nathan stepped forward, blocking my path. This is harassment, Becca. You can't do this. It's a standard inspection, clearly outlined in the lease agreement you signed, I replied, my voice level. And it's Rebecca, or Ms. Thompson in a professional context. You've relinquished all rights to familiarity. Kevin was watching this exchange with growing discomfort. Is there some issue I should know about? No issue, I assured him. Mr. Thompson and I have a prior acquaintance, but this is purely a professional visit. She's my ex-wife, Nathan said bluntly to Kevin, whose eyes widened in shock as he looked between his sister, Nathan, and me, finally understanding the dynamics at play. Ex being the operative word, I noted calmly. Your current lease is of greater relevance. The next inspection will be scheduled for next month. You'll receive proper notification, of course. As I walked toward the door, Melissa finally found her voice. Why are you doing this? I paused, considering the question with genuine reflection. I'm a businesswoman, Melissa. This property represented an excellent investment opportunity. The fact that you chose, of all places, to live here? I smiled slightly. Let's call it an unexpected dividend. The following weeks unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated. Nathan attempted to break the lease, claiming conflict of interest. The property management company, following my explicit instructions, reminded him of the substantial early termination fee and the legally binding agreement he'd signed. "They're looking for another apartment," Kevin reported uncomfortably during our next management meeting. "My sister is pretty upset." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied. "Riverside offers unparalleled amenities and location. They'd be hard-pressed to find comparable value elsewhere in the city." "About that," Kevin hesitated, "I feel I should disclose that Nathan is my brother-in-law. There might be a conflict." "Kevin," I interrupted gently, "your relationship with the tenants was disclosed from the beginning. As long as you maintain professional standards in your management duties, there's no conflict. Unless you feel unable to do so?" "No, I can be professional," he assured me quickly. "It's just awkward now." "Life often is," I observed, "but we adapt." Nathan and Melissa did not find another apartment. The competitive rental market, combined with the substantial cost of breaking their lease, effectively trapped them in a home I controlled. Their perfect penthouse had become a gilded cage. I maintained a regular presence at Riverside, scheduling meetings in the management office, conducting periodic inspections, and overseeing additional renovations to common areas. Each time I encountered either of them, I was unfailingly professional and courteous. It was during the third monthly inspection that Nathan finally confronted me directly. Melissa was out, and he met me and Kevin at the door with barely contained fury. "This has to stop," he said after Kevin had moved to inspect the bathroom plumbing. "You've made your point, Becca." "I'm conducting business, Nathan," I replied, noting a small wall scuff on my clipboard. "The fact that you find standard property management practices personally uncomfortable is not my concern." "You're enjoying this," he accused, lowering his voice. "Controlling where we live, invading our space. It's petty and beneath you." I looked up from my clipboard, meeting his gaze directly for the first time since our divorce. "Beneath me? Like sleeping with my best friend was beneath you? Like stealing from our joint accounts was beneath you? Like planning your exit from our marriage while lying to my face was beneath you?" My calm facade slipped momentarily, revealing the anger I still carried. Nathan took a step back, surprised by the intensity in my voice. "That's what this is about," he said. "Revenge." "This is about business," I corrected, regaining my composure. "I own this building because it's a sound investment. The fact that you chose to live here in a unit I personally renovated, signing a lease with terms I established, those were your choices, Nathan. I simply allowed you to make them." Kevin returned from the bathroom, oblivious to our tense exchange. "Everything looks great in here. Shall we check the HVAC system next?" "Please," I nodded, turning away from Nathan's stunned expression. As we completed the inspection, I noticed subtle changes in the apartment since my last visit. Photos of Nathan and Melissa in matching wedding attire on a beach, their small ceremony presumably. New throw pillows on the sectional sofa that had once been in our home. A half-completed design board propped against the wall, suggesting Melissa was working on a new project. They were attempting to build a life together in the shadow of their betrayal, a life I now had the power to observe, to influence, even to disrupt if I chose. The realization should have brought satisfaction, but instead, I felt a strange emptiness. The control I'd so carefully orchestrated offered less fulfillment than I'd expected. 6 months into Nathan and Melissa's tenancy, an unexpected pipe burst flooded 3 units at Riverside, including Penthouse 7B. The damage was significant. Hardwood floors buckled, drywall saturated, personal possessions waterlogged. "They'll need to relocate temporarily during repairs," Kevin informed me, genuine concern in his voice. "At least 3 weeks of work. Insurance will cover hotel costs, but..." "But?" I prompted. "Melissa's pregnant," Kevin said quietly. "About 4 months along. The stress of this, plus having to move temporarily, it's not ideal. The news hit me with surprising force. Melissa was pregnant with Nathan's child. They were creating a family, the family Nathan and I had discussed but never started. For a moment, I couldn't respond. "Ms. Thompson?" Kevin prompted. "About the temporary relocation." I made a decision then, one not driven by my carefully cultivated plan. For controlled justice. "Prepare Unit 5A for them," I instructed. "It's furnished and currently vacant. They can use it until repairs are completed at no additional cost." Kevin's expression reflected surprise and relief. "That's very generous. Thank you." I nodded, already wondering at my own motivations. Was this compassion? Or simply a different form of control, demonstrating power through calculated mercy rather than punishment? The following day, I personally supervised the preparation of Unit 5A, ensuring it was immaculate and properly stocked with essentials. When Nathan and Melissa arrived with hastily packed suitcases, their expressions registered shock at finding me there. "The unit is ready for you," I said formally. "All utilities are active and basic supplies have been provided. Your insurance adjuster will meet you here tomorrow morning to process claims for damaged personal items." Melissa looked pale and tired, one hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded stomach. Nathan stood close beside her, his posture both defensive and defeated. "Why are you doing this?" Melissa asked, echoing her question from months before, but with genuine confusion rather than accusation. I considered my answer carefully. "Contrary to what you might believe, I don't wish you actual harm," I said finally. "Neither of you. What happened between us was significant, but it doesn't necessitate ongoing cruelty." "But you purchased this entire building," Nathan pointed out. "Became our landlord. Created this power dynamic deliberately." "Yes," I acknowledged simply. "I did." "To punish us," Melissa concluded. "Perhaps initially," I admitted. "But now?" I'm not entirely sure. The three of us stood in uncomfortable silence, the weight of our shared history filling the space between us. In that moment, I recognized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. They looked exhausted. Not just from the immediate crisis of the flood, but from months of living under my shadow, of navigating the consequences of their choices while subject to my indirect authority. "Your apartment should be restored within 3 weeks," I said. Finally. "This unit is yours until then. There's a folder on the counter with all relevant information." As I turned to leave, Nathan spoke. "For what it's worth, Rebecca, I am sorry. Not just for the affair, but for how I handled everything. The lying, the financial deceptions. You deserved better." His apology, likely prompted by the vulnerability of their current situation, was nevertheless the first genuine acknowledgement of wrong he'd offered since our divorce. "Yes," I agreed simply. "I did deserve better." I left them standing in the temporary apartment, my emotions conflicted. The power I held over their living situation suddenly felt less satisfying than I'd anticipated. Their impending parenthood introduced a new dimension I hadn't considered in my calculations. Later that evening, as I sat alone in my home office, reviewing Riverside financial statements, I received an unexpected text from Melissa. "Thank you for the apartment. I know you didn't have to do that." I stared at the message for a long time before responding with a simple, "You're welcome." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was, perhaps, the first acknowledgement that controlling their lives wasn't healing my own pain. The reality was more complicated than my neat narrative of justice had allowed. The following week, I instructed Kevin to oversee the repairs to Penthouse 7B without my direct involvement. I reduced my visits to Riverside, delegating routine inspections to the maintenance staff. My constant presence had served its purpose. Nathan and Melissa knew exactly who controlled their living situation but continuing to insert myself into their daily lives suddenly seemed unnecessary. "Are you losing interest in the Riverside property?" Diane asked during our monthly strategy meeting. "You were so focused on it initially." "Not losing interest," I clarified, recalibrating my approach. Riverside is one of 12 properties in our portfolio now. It deserves proportional attention. In truth, my step back from Riverside coincided with a step forward in other aspects of my life. Thompson Realty Group was expanding rapidly, acquiring distressed properties across the metropolitan area and transforming them into profitable investments. My professional reputation had grown beyond the shadow of my former marriage, establishing me as a formidable presence in local real estate. I began dating again, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Michael Reed, the contractor who had supervised many of our renovations, invited me to dinner after we completed a particularly challenging project. His straightforward manner and genuine interest in my perspectives were refreshingly uncomplicated after the elaborate deceptions of my marriage. "You're different than I expected," Michael commented during our third date at a new fusion restaurant downtown. "How so?" I asked, curious about his perception. "Kevin Chen mentioned you were his nightmare client. Exacting, always watching. Intimidating," Michael admitted with a smile. "But you're not actually interested in control for its own sake, are you? You just have precise standards." His observation startled me with its insight. Had I become so focused on controlling Nathan and Melissa's environment that I'd developed a reputation for micromanagement? That wasn't who I'd been before the betrayal. It wasn't who I wanted to be now. "I went through a difficult period," I acknowledged. "Personal and professional boundaries became blurred." Michael nodded without pressing for details. "We all have chapters we wouldn't want to define us permanently." His comment stayed with me long after our date ended. Was I allowing my response to Nathan and Melissa's betrayal to define me? Was the control I'd so carefully orchestrated actually constraining my own progress? 3 days later, I received a call from Kevin that forced me to confront these questions directly. "Nathan and Melissa are requesting permission to break their lease early," he informed me. "They've found a house they want to purchase in Oakwood Heights. With the baby coming, they're looking for more space." Oakwood Heights, the same neighborhood where Nathan and I had lived during our marriage, where he had betrayed me with Melissa. In our own home, the symmetry was impossible to ignore. "The lease has a clear early termination clause," I replied after a moment. "Standard fee, 60 days notice." "Yes, but given the circumstances, they were hoping for some flexibility," Kevin continued awkwardly. "The repairs after the flood, the pregnancy complications Melissa's experiencing. They asked if you might consider waiving the fee as a gesture of goodwill." My initial instinct was immediate refusal. Why should I offer goodwill to the two people who had betrayed me so completely? The early termination fee was significant, intentionally punitive if I was honest with myself. Forcing them to pay it would be a final exercise of the control I'd established. But what would that accomplish, really? Another financial strain on the family about to welcome a child. Another chapter in our ongoing drama of power and retribution. "Tell them I'll consider it," I said finally. "I'd like to review their tenancy record first." After hanging up, I sat at my desk for a long time, contemplating the decision before me. In the 6 months they'd lived at Riverside, Nathan and Melissa had been model tenants. Rent always paid on time, no complaints from neighbors, proper maintenance requests. The flooded apartment had been an unfortunate circumstance beyond anyone's control. More significantly, they had endured my presence, my inspections, my subtle reminders of their transgressions with remarkable composure. They had adjusted to living under my authority without complaint or conflict. I pulled up their lease agreement on my computer, reviewing the early termination clause I had personally drafted. 2 months' rent as penalty, plus forfeiture of the BIA, security deposit. designed to discourage exactly the kind of exit they now proposed. Then I opened another file, the financial records I'd compiled during my divorce, documenting every unauthorized transfer Nathan had made to Melissa's accounts during their affair, the amounts that had fueled their betrayal while depleting our marital assets. The total was almost exactly equal to the early termination fee they now sought to avoid. Perhaps that was it, the perfect symmetry to conclude this chapter. They had taken from me without permission. I had reclaimed equivalent value through legitimate means. The scales balanced, not through ongoing control, but through final resolution. I dialed Kevin's number. "Tell them I'll waive the fee," I instructed. "Under one condition." 1 week later, I sat across from Nathan and Melissa in the management office of Riverside Luxury Apartments. Kevin had arranged the meeting with obvious relief that a reasonable solution might be reached. Melissa looked tired but determined, her pregnancy more evident now. Nathan appeared guarded, clearly expecting some elaborate trap in my offer to waive the termination fee. "Thank you for meeting with me," I began, maintaining a professional tone. "I understand you found a house in Oakwood Heights and would like to end your lease early." "Yes," Nathan confirmed cautiously. "We close on the property next month, but the current owners are flexible on the move-in date." I nodded, opening the folder I'd brought with me. "I'm prepared to waive the early termination fee under the condition that we have an honest conversation, just once, about what happened." Melissa and Nathan exchanged glances, clearly caught off guard by my simple request. "That's all?" Nathan asked suspiciously. "You want to talk?" "One conversation," I confirmed. "Completely honest, no holding back. Then we all move forward separately, without the financial entanglement of this lease." Kevin cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Should I step out for this?" "Actually, yes," I said gently. "This won't take long." After Kevin left, closing the door behind him, an uncomfortable silence filled the management office. Through the window, I could see residents coming and going, living their uncomplicated lives, unaware of the tangled history being unraveled in this small room. "What do you want to know?" Melissa finally asked, her hand protectively resting on her stomach. "I want to understand when it really started," I said, my voice calmer than I'd expected. "Not the physical affair. I've pieced that timeline together already from the financial records. I want to know when you both decided that betraying me was acceptable." Nathan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It wasn't a single decision. Rebecca. It was a series of small choices, each one making the next seem less significant." "Explain," I said simply. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it sent an unexpected pang through me. "When you started working toward partnership at Evergreen, your focus shifted. 70-hour weeks, constant client meetings, strategy sessions on weekends. I felt peripheral." "So my career success justified your infidelity?" I asked, keeping my tone curious rather than accusatory. "No," Nathan admitted. "Nothing justified it. I'm explaining, not excusing." Melissa spoke up, her voice quiet. "I was struggling, my business failing. My relationship with Jason had just ended. You were so busy, but Nathan was there, helping with my financial planning, listening to my problems." She looked down at her hands. "We started meeting for coffee to discuss the guest house renovation, then lunch to review design plans, then dinner because conversations kept running long." "And the financial transfers?" I asked, opening the folder to reveal the spreadsheet I'd compiled months ago. "These began almost immediately." Nathan had the grace to look ashamed. "Initially, they were legitimate. Investment in her business, payment for design services. Then," he trailed off. "Then they became a way to finance our time together," Melissa finished. "Weekend trips disguised as design research, meals, Hotel rooms when meeting at my apartment felt too risky. Using the money from our joint accounts, I noted. The same accounts you tried to hide during divorce proceedings. Nathan nodded, unable to meet my eyes. By then, I was in too deep, trying to protect what I could. I turned a page in my folder, revealing another document, a record of communications I'd obtained during discovery in our divorce. You discussed how to approach the divorce 2 months before I discovered the affair. You were planning your exit, while still living as my husband. Yes, Nathan admitted. We convinced ourselves it would be cleaner that way. That once everything was settled, we could start fresh without the mess of an affair becoming public. The irony, I observed, is that your careful planning actually gave me everything I needed to secure favorable divorce terms. The unauthorized transfers, the hidden communications, the premeditated separation of assets. All documented, all working against you in court. Nathan's jaw tightened. Is that why you wanted this conversation? To gloat about how you outsmarted me in the divorce? No, I replied honestly. I wanted to understand if either of you ever considered what you were doing to me. Not just the affair, but the elaborate deception. The friend I trusted, and the husband I loved, conspiring for months, lying to my face daily. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. I considered it constantly. Every time we met, every text we exchanged. I felt sick with guilt, but I kept telling myself it was already too late to undo the damage, that honesty would only hurt you more. And now, I asked, looking back, what would you have done differently? She wiped at her tears, collecting herself. I would have been honest, with you, with myself, before crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. I would have stepped back when I first recognized my feelings for Nathan were inappropriate. Nathan nodded slowly. I would have talked to you about feeling neglected instead of seeking validation elsewhere. I would have been brave enough to address our issues directly, rather than escaping into something that seemed easier. I studied them both, searching for signs of insincerity, but finding none. Whether their regret was genuine or merely a product of hindsight, they at least appeared to understand the magnitude of their betrayal. One last question, I said, closing the folder. Are you happy now? Truly? The question seemed to surprise them both. After a moment, Melissa spoke. I'm working towards something real, she said carefully. Building on a foundation that started with deception isn't easy. There's guilt, trust issues, the constant awareness of how we began. But yes, most days, I think we're finding our way to happiness. Nathan nodded in agreement. Not the uncomplicated happiness we might have imagined, but something we're committed to making work. Especially now, he added, glancing at Melissa's pregnant form. I absorbed their answers, surprised by my own reaction. 6 months ago, their happiness would have felt like a personal affront, a final insult after their betrayal. Now it seemed largely irrelevant to my own well-being. Their life together, complex, flawed, hopeful, was separate from my journey forward. Thank you for your honesty, I said, standing and extending a document across the desk. This releases you from the lease without penalty, effective 30 days from today. Your security deposit will be returned in full, assuming the apartment passes final inspection. Nathan took the paper, scanning it with the caution of someone who had learned to expect complications. That's it? We talk honestly and you waive the fee? That's it, I confirmed. Consider it a closing of accounts. The financial damage you did during our marriage approximately equals what you would owe for breaking this lease. Let's call it even. Melissa looked up at me, her expression a mixture of gratitude and lingering guilt. Rebecca, I know it doesn't change anything, but I am truly sorry. For everything. I know, I said simply. I hope your new home brings you both what you're looking for." As they left the office, Nathan paused at the door. The building purchase, becoming our landlord, was it all about making us uncomfortable? Getting some form of revenge? I considered the question carefully, wanting my answer to be truthful. Initially, yes. When I overheard you discussing Riverside as your ideal home, something clicked. I could watch you build your new life in a space I controlled. It seemed fitting. "And now?" he pressed. "Now I realize that controlling your environment didn't actually help me move forward," I admitted. "It just kept me tethered to the past in a different way." Nathan nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. "For what it's worth, I think the woman you've become, this confident, direct businesswoman, she's impressive, even intimidating." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by his candor. "But I didn't become this person for you, or because of you. Remember that." After they left, I stood at the window watching them cross the parking lot together. Nathan's hand rested lightly on Melissa's back, guiding her around a puddle from the morning rain. A gesture so reminiscent of how he'd once attended to me that I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. But the familiar ache I'd expected didn't materialize. Instead, I felt something unexpected: relief. The elaborate mechanism of control I'd constructed, buying this building, becoming their landlord, inserting myself into their daily lives, had served its purpose. Not as the revenge fantasy I'd initially imagined, but as a bridge between the person I'd been during my marriage and the person I was becoming now. I returned to my desk and called Kevin back into the office. "They'll be moving out in 30 days, I informed him. "Please begin preparing for new tenants." "You waived the fee?" Kevin asked, surprised. "It seemed appropriate," I replied, gathering my documents. Sometimes the cleanest resolution is the most advantageous for everyone involved. That evening, as I drove home through rush hour traffic, I realized I'd spent nearly 10 months focused on Nathan and Melissa, first in shock and anger after discovering their affair, then in calculated planning during the divorce, and finally in strategic control as their landlord. 10 months of my life oriented around their betrayal and its aftermath. It was time to reorient toward a future defined by my own choices, not their actions. When I arrived home, I found Michael waiting on my porch with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. We'd been dating for just over 2 months now, taking things slowly, building something deliberately uncomplicated after the elaborate deceptions of my marriage. "Good day?" he asked as I approached. "Transitional," I replied, unlocking the dagger to let us both in. I just closed a significant chapter. Later, after dinner, as Michael and I sat on my patio beneath string lights that cast a warm glow over the evening, I told him about Nathan and Melissa, about becoming their landlord, about finally releasing them from the lease. "That's not what I expected," he admitted, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. "Pretty elaborate." "Too elaborate," I agreed. "I think I needed to prove something. To them. To myself. That I wasn't powerless. That I couldn't be discarded. Without consequences." "And did you prove it?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. Yes, but I also learned that having power over someone doesn't necessarily heal what they've broken in you. That has to come from somewhere else. Michael nodded, understanding without needing to offer solutions or platitudes. It was one of the qualities I appreciated most about him, his comfort with complexity, with questions that didn't have neat answers. "What's next for the infamous Riverside property?" he asked, skillfully shifting the conversation. "Full renovation of Penthouse 7B once they vacate," I replied, my mind already envisioning the possibilities. Perhaps convert it to a short-term executive rental. The market for those is exploding downtown. As we discussed business possibilities, I realized how naturally my thoughts had shifted from the personal entanglement with Nathan and Melissa to the practical considerations of property management. Progress, however incremental, was still progress. 2 weeks later, Diane and I met at Magnolia Coffee Shop to discuss our expanding portfolio. Thompson Realty Group had just acquired our 14th property, a distressed office building we planned to convert to mixed-use retail and residential. "We're going to need another project manager," Diane observed, reviewing our spreadsheets. "Michael's team is already handling 3 renovations. This new conversion will require dedicated supervision." "I've been thinking about that," I replied, sliding a proposal across the table. "What if we bring the management in-house? Create a construction division rather than continuing to contract externally?" Diane studied the numbers, her expression shifting from skeptical to intrigued. "Ambitious. Higher initial investment, but better margins long-term." She looked up at me with newfound respect. "This is actually brilliant, Becca. When did you put this together?" "I've been working on it for weeks," I admitted. "Ever since I realized how much energy I was wasting on peripheral concerns." Before Diane could respond, movement near the door caught my attention. Melissa had just entered the coffee shop, her pregnancy now prominently visible. She hadn't noticed me yet, focused on placing her order at the counter. Diane followed. My gaze. "Isn't that your ex's new wife? Kevin's sister?" "Yes," I confirmed quietly. "They're moving out of Riverside at the end of the month." "Want to leave before she sees you?" Diane offered, already gathering her papers. I considered the suggestion, then shook my head. "No need. We've said what needed saying." "But when—" Melissa turned from the counter with her drink and caught sight of me. She hesitated before deliberately changing direction to approach our table. "Rebecca," she greeted me, her tone carefully neutral. "Diane, right?" she added, acknowledging my business partner. Diane nodded coolly. "I should make some calls," she said, squeezing my shoulder supportively before stepping outside with her phone. An awkward silence settled between Melissa and me. Former best friends, now connected only by a shared history neither of us could comfortably reference. "How are you feeling?" I asked, gesturing vaguely toward her pregnancy. "Better now," she admitted. "The first trimester was rough, but everything looks healthy." She hesitated, then added, "It's a girl." The information landed with unexpected weight. A daughter. Nathan would have a daughter. "Congratulations," I said, finding I genuinely meant it. Melissa shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to thank you for waiving the lease termination fee. It made a significant difference with the down payment on the house." "It seemed like the right conclusion," I replied simply. She nodded, clearly wanting to say more but uncertain how to proceed. Finally, she asked, "Are you seeing someone?" Kevin mentioned a contractor who's been around Riverside a lot. The question surprised me, not just its content, but the hint of genuine interest behind it. For a moment, it echoed our old friendship, the way we'd once discussed relationships with unguarded enthusiasm. "Michael," I confirmed. "It's relatively new. Uncomplicated." "Good," Melissa said softly. "You deserve uncomplicated." Another silence fell between us, filled with the ambient noise of the coffee shop, milk being steamed, orders called out, the gentle murmur of conversations at nearby tables, normal life continuing all around us. "The house we bought," Melissa said suddenly. "I realized after we closed that it's only 3 blocks from your old office. I worried you might think we chose it deliberately to be in your path. The idea hadn't occurred to me." "Did you?" "No," she assured me quickly. "It was the school district, actually, and the yard." She hesitated, then added, "But I would understand if you wanted us to find someplace else." The suggestion was so unexpected that I laughed, a genuine, surprised sound that seemed to startle us both. "Melissa, I waived your lease termination fee. I'm not going to dictate which house you can buy. She smiled tentatively. No more controlling our living situation? No more, I confirmed. I think we've all outgrown that particular chapter. Melissa nodded, relief visible in her expression. Well, I should go. Nathan's waiting in the car. She gestured toward the window where I could see my ex-husband's familiar profile as he sat in their parked sedan, checking his phone. Take care of yourself, I said as she turned to leave. And Melissa? I added, causing her to look back. I hope your daughter brings you both joy. Her eyes filled unexpectedly. Thank you, Rebecca. That means more than you know. As she left, I watched her cross to the car, watched as she said something to Nathan that made him look up toward the coffee shop window. Our eyes met briefly across the distance, acknowledgement rather than connection, before he pulled away from the curb. Diane returned to our table, eyeing me carefully. You okay? Surprisingly, yes, I replied, returning my attention to the proposal before us. Now, about this construction division, I think we should start interviewing potential directors next week. The next 10 days passed in a blur of activity. Thompson Realty Group's expansion required my full attention, which proved unexpectedly therapeutic. My thoughts rarely strayed to Nathan and Melissa now, and when they did, the sharp edges of betrayal had softened into something more like rueful acceptance. What they had done couldn't be undone, but its power to define my present was diminishing daily. Michael and I continued seeing each other, our relationship evolving with a refreshing directness. Unlike my marriage to Nathan, which had been built on the idealistic assumptions of youth, this connection was being cultivated with mature awareness of complexities and imperfections. I have trust issues, I'd admitted during a weekend hike, our conversation as winding as the forest trail. Not just because of Nathan and Melissa, but because I didn't see it coming. I pride myself on perception, on reading situations accurately. Missing something so significant shook my confidence. Michael had considered this thoughtfully. Makes sense. But there's a difference between healthy caution and paralyzing suspicion. One protects you, the other isolates you. Which do you think I'm practicing? I'd asked. Mostly healthy caution, he'd replied with disarming honesty. But occasionally I see the other version, when you analyze minor inconsistencies as if they're evidence of deliberate deception. His observation had been uncomfortably accurate. I had developed a tendency to scrutinize details, to construct elaborate explanations for simple oversights. It was exhausting. Even I could recognize that. I'm working on it, I'd promised. That's all anyone can ask, he'd said, taking my hand as we continued along the path. The day Nathan and Melissa were scheduled to move out of Riverside, I deliberately scheduled meetings across town. There was no need to observe their departure, no satisfaction to be gained from witnessing the physical transition. The emotional transition had already occurred, for all of us. Kevin texted me that evening. 7B, officially vacant. Final inspection scheduled tomorrow. I sent a brief acknowledgement, then set my phone aside. Tomorrow I would visit the empty penthouse, assess renovation needs for the executive rental conversion, and officially close this chapter of intertwined personal and professional concerns. But when I arrived at Riverside the following morning, I discovered unexpected complications. They left some items behind, Kevin reported, leading me toward the elevator. Not furniture, but personal things. It's strange. They were so thorough with everything else. My first thought was calculated abandonment. Perhaps damaged items they didn't want to move. But when Kevin unlocked the door to Penthouse 7B, I realized the oversight wasn't malicious. The apartment was indeed empty of furniture, the spaces echoing with absence. But on the kitchen counter sat a small potted orchid with an envelope propped against it. And in the master bedroom closet hung a single garment bag. Should I dispose of these? Kevin asked uncertainly. No, I replied, moving toward the counter. I'll handle it. The envelope had my name written on it in Melissa's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a card, the message brief but clear. Rebecca, the orchid is from your grandmother's original cutting, the one you gave me when I admired it years ago. I've propagated it through 3 generations. It seemed right that it should return. To you. The garment bag contains your ivory silk evening gown. You left it at my apartment the weekend before. Everything changed. I had it professionally cleaned but never found the right moment to return it. We're not leaving these things as burdens or obligations. If you prefer to discard them, we understand completely. But it felt wrong to take them with us or simply throw them away. Thank you for the strange grace you showed us these past months. It was more than either of us deserved. Melissa. I stood in the empty apartment, holding the card, feeling the weight of these small remnants of my former life. The orchid had indeed originated from my grandmother's beloved plant, which I'd divided and shared with Melissa during happier times. The evening gown had been purchased for a charity gala we'd attended together. Nathan, Melissa, her date at the time, and me, nearly a year before the affair began. These weren't calculated gestures meant to provoke emotion. They were quiet. Acknowledgements of a shared past, returned with surprising thoughtfulness. Kevin cleared his throat, reminding me of his presence. Is everything okay? Yes, I assured him, tucking the card into my pocket. Just some items being returned to their rightful owner. I carefully lifted the orchid, admiring its delicate blooms. Despite everything, Melissa had cared for this living connection to my family history. The thought was oddly comforting, evidence that even amid betrayal, some genuine care had persisted. I'll take these with me, I told Kevin. Let's proceed with the inspection. We moved through the apartment methodically, noting minor damage and wear. The hardwood floors would need refinishing after the water damage repairs. Several light fixtures should be updated for the executive rental concept. The kitchen backsplash, selected specifically to appeal to Nathan's aesthetic preferences, now seemed dated compared to current trends. Full renovation, I decided, making notes on my tablet. I want this space completely transformed. New concept, new materials, new energy. Kevin nodded, clearly relieved by my business-like approach. I'll contact the contractors today. Any specific direction? I considered the question, looking around the space that had served as both trap and proving ground for the past several months. Something forward-looking, I said finally. This space has been too defined by the past. That evening, I placed the rescued orchid on my kitchen windowsill, its elegant white blooms luminous in the fading light. The evening gown I'd hung in the spare bedroom closet, uncertain whether I'd ever wear it again, but unwilling to discard it. Some connections, it seemed, resisted clean severance. My phone rang, Michael calling to confirm our dinner plans. As we discussed restaurant options, I realized I hadn't mentioned Nathan and Melissa's move out to him. Not because it felt secret or significant, but because it had receded in importance compared to present concerns. Something happened today that I should probably mention, I said after we'd settled on a new bistro downtown. Nathan and Melissa officially moved out of Riverside. Ah, Michael replied, his tone curious but not probing. How do you feel? About that? The question was simple but profound. How did I feel? Not triumphant as I might have expected months ago when orchestrating their tenancy. Not wounded, as I had been when discovering their betrayal. Not vindictive, as I had felt during the divorce proceedings. Ready, I said finally. Ready to renovate that space completely. Ready to focus on what's ahead rather than what's behind. I like that answer, Michael said warmly. Should we celebrate this transition tonight? I think we should, I agreed. But not as an ending, as a beginning. After hanging up, I stood at the window, watching twilight settle over the city. Somewhere across town, Nathan and Melissa were arranging furniture in their new home, preparing for their daughter's arrival, continuing their life together. And here I stood, tending to a rescued orchid, planning a business expansion, nurturing a promising new relationship. We were all moving forward, following paths that had diverged dramatically from what any of us had once envisioned. The betrayal that had connected us would always be part of our shared history, but it no longer needed to determine our separate futures. The orchid would bloom again, I knew, regardless of its complicated journey. And so, it seemed, would I. 3 weeks later, I stood in the completely gutted Penthouse 7B, now unrecognizable as the space Nathan and Melissa had occupied. Walls had been removed to create an even more open concept. The dated fixtures had been replaced with contemporary designs. Even the view seemed somehow different, framed by new window treatments that emphasized different aspects of the cityscape. Michael walked through the space beside me, pointing out structural improvements that went beyond mere aesthetics. The subflooring has been completely replaced, he explained, and we've upgraded all the electrical to smart home capabilities. This space isn't just visually transformed, it's functionally superior now. I nodded, appreciating the metaphor even if Michael hadn't intended it as such. How soon until it's ready for the executive rental market? 6 weeks, he estimated, just in time for the fall business travel season. As we continued our inspection, my phone chimed with an email notification. Opening it revealed a message from Evergreen Financial Partners, my former employer, Nathan's current workplace. Dear Ms. Thompson, following your impressive expansion of Thompson Realty Group, we would like to discuss potential partnership opportunities between our firms. Your innovative approach to property acquisition and development has not gone unnoticed. Would you be available for a meeting next week to explore mutually beneficial arrangements? Regards, William Parker, CEO, Evergreen Financial Partners. Will Parker, Nathan's boss. The same man who had once dismissed my investment strategies as unnecessarily cautious. The same firm where I had once been passed over for partnership in favor of less qualified male colleagues. Michael noticed my expression. Good news or bad news? Interesting news, I replied, showing him the email. Life has a peculiar sense of irony sometimes. Are you going to take the meeting? He asked. I considered the question, looking around the transformed penthouse. 6 months ago, I might have seen this invitation as an opportunity for another form of control or vindication, a chance to return to Evergreen on my terms, perhaps even becoming Nathan's superior in the corporate hierarchy. Now, however, I recognized it simply as a business opportunity to be evaluated on its practical merits. I'll meet with them, I decided, but with clear boundaries about what partnership might entail. Later that day, as I drafted my response to Will Parker, I realized how much had changed since I'd first conceived the plan to become Nathan and Melissa's landlord. What had begun as an elaborate mechanism for control and subtle revenge had evolved into something I hadn't anticipated, a catalyst for genuine growth. Purchasing Riverside had expanded my investment portfolio. Managing the property had developed my leadership skills. Confronting Nathan and Melissa had facilitated emotional closure. Each element of my carefully orchestrated plan had served purposes beyond my original vengeful intentions. The orchid on my windowsill had produced a new leaf, small but vibrant, reaching toward the light. Regeneration following disruption. Adaptation rather than defeat. I finished my email to Will Parker, setting a meeting for the following week. Then I closed my laptop and called Michael. Feel like helping me choose furniture for the penthouse? I asked when he answered. I'm thinking something completely different from the previous design. Absolutely, he agreed. Fresh start? Fresh start, I confirmed, with no ghosts from the past. And as I spoke the words, I realized they applied not just to Penthouse 7B, but to the woman who now owned it, Rebecca Thompson, no longer defined by betrayal, no longer motivated by control, no longer tethered to a marriage that had ended or a friendship that had failed. Sometimes the most elaborate plans lead to the simplest truths, that moving forward requires letting go, that healing comes not from power over others, but from reclaiming power over yourself, and that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's the life you build after surviving what was meant to break you. The next morning, I visited Riverside to review renovation progress. Walking through the lobby, I passed a young couple touring the property with Grace, the leasing agent. They looked hopeful, excited about the possibility of making this place their home. The penthouse units are truly special, Grace was telling them. One is currently being renovated into our executive rental program, but the other will be available next month. We'd love to see it, the woman said eagerly, her partner nodding in agreement. I smiled to myself, continuing toward the elevator. New beginnings all around. For them, for me, even for Penthouse 7B. The building I had purchased as an instrument of control had become simply what it was always meant to be. A home for some, an investment for others, a stepping stone to future possibilities. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of the young couple, their hands linked, their futures unwritten. I wished them well, these strangers who would never know the complex history of the property they might soon call home. I wished them joy, growth, resilience, all the things I was finally claiming for myself. The elevator ascended smoothly, carrying me upward, forward, onward. 1 year after Nathan and Melissa moved into Riverside Luxury Apartments, I sat at my desk reviewing the property's financial reports. The investment had paid off spectacularly, not just financially, but in ways I never anticipated. The door to my office opened as Diane walked in, coffee in hand. Quarterly numbers are in. Riverside's outperforming every other property in our portfolio. The executive rental program is working, I replied, setting aside the file. Converting Penthouse 7B was the right decision. Diane nodded, taking a seat across from me. Hard to believe it's been 6 months since they moved out. Any regrets about waiving that termination fee? I considered her question carefully. The day Nathan and Melissa had sat across from me in the management office, nervously requesting an early termination of their lease, had marked a turning point. Their admission of wrongdoing, their sincere if belated apologies, and my decision to release them without financial penalty had closed a chapter I hadn't realized needed ending. None, I answered honestly. Some debts can't be measured in dollars. My phone chimed with a message from Michael. Building inspector approved. Westlake renovations? Celebrating tonight? A smile formed involuntarily. Michael and I had been dating for 10 months now, our relationship evolving with a refreshing straightforwardness that contrasted sharply with the deceptions of my marriage. His construction company had become Thompson Realty Group's primary contractor, our professional collaboration enhancing rather than complicating our personal connection. Go ahead and take off early, Diane suggested, noting my expression. The empire will survive without you for one afternoon. Outside, autumn painted the city in brilliant oranges and reds as I walked through the downtown district toward Michael's latest project site. Thompson Realty Group now owned 5 major properties, with 2 more acquisitions pending. What had begun as a calculated move to control Nathan and Melissa's living situation had blossomed into a thriving business empire. My phone rang unexpectedly. Kevin, Chen, still managing Riverside, despite his initial discomfort with the complicated dynamics between his sister, her husband, and their former landlord. Ms. Thompson, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's been a situation at Riverside. A pipe burst in the east wing, affecting several units. Insurance? I asked, immediately shifting to problem-solving mode. Already notified, but there's something else. Kevin hesitated. Melissa was here when it happened. She was visiting me for lunch. She's the one who noticed the water damage first, actually saved us from a much worse situation. I paused on the sidewalk, processing this information. Is she still there? Yes, Kevin sounded uncertain. She asked if she could help contact affected residents, since she has experience with crisis management from her design business. I wasn't sure if that would be appropriate. The old Rebecca might have found this intrusion territorial, perhaps even threatening. But something had shifted during these months of rebuilding my life. The thought of Melissa at Riverside no longer triggered anger or resentment. Just a mild curiosity about this strange intersection of our separate paths. Tell her thank you, I decided. Her help would be appreciated. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When I arrived at Riverside, maintenance crews were already addressing the water damage. In the management office, Melissa sat at a desk, phone to her ear, efficiently contacting residents. She looked up as I entered, surprise flickering across her face. I'll call you back shortly with those details, she said to whoever was on the line before hanging up. Rebecca, I didn't expect you to come personally. It's still my building, I replied, setting my purse on Kevin's desk. Kevin says you helped identify the leak early. Melissa nodded, smoothing her shirt self-consciously. Her pregnancy had ended months ago. The daughter I occasionally heard about through Kevin was now nearly 6 months old. Pure coincidence. I was having lunch with Kevin when one of the maintenance staff mentioned a water pressure issue. Well, thank you. I surveyed the organized chaos of the management office, emergency contacts displayed on screens, floor plans marked with affected units, staff coordinating remediation efforts. You seem to have things well in hand. An awkward silence settled between us, filled with unspoken history. How's Emma? I asked finally, surprising myself with the genuine interest in my tone. Kevin had mentioned the baby's name during one of our management meetings. Melissa's expression softened. She's amazing, starting to sit up on her own, laughing at everything. She hesitated before adding, Nathan's a good father, very involved. I nodded, absorbing this information without the pain I might have expected. And your design business? Growing steadily. I'm focusing on commercial spaces now, more sustainable as a working mom. She gestured vaguely toward the crisis management unfolding around us. This kind of thing, client emergencies, isn't as manageable with a baby. I can imagine. I moved toward Kevin's computer to review the affected units, conscious of Melissa watching me. Rebecca, she said suddenly, her voice quiet but determined. I never properly thanked you for waiving the lease termination fee when we found the house. You could have made things difficult for us, but you didn't. I turned to face her fully. It wasn't about being easy or difficult. It was about moving forward. Still, she insisted, it was generous, considering everything. For a moment, I studied this woman who had once been my closest friend, then my greatest betrayer, and now this strange neutral entity, someone who had shaped my life profoundly but no longer actively influenced it. How is it? I asked abruptly. Building a life on a foundation that began with deception? I've always wondered. The question wasn't meant to wound, merely to understand. Melissa seemed to recognize this, considering her answer carefully. Complicated, she admitted. There are moments of joy, genuine happiness, and moments when the weight of how we began feels suffocating. We're working through it, day by day. She met my eyes directly. But I won't pretend it isn't hard, knowing what we destroyed to create this life. Her honesty was unexpectedly refreshing. For so long, I'd imagined them living in uncomplicated happiness, their betrayal unremarked and unrepented. The reality, that they carried the burden of their choices daily, wasn't something I'd allowed myself to consider. Thank you, I said. Simply, for the honesty. Kevin returned with damage reports, breaking the moment between us. I immersed myself in property management concerns, authorizing emergency accommodations for displaced residents and expedited repairs. Melissa continued helping contact affected tenants, her efficiency undeniable. 2 hours later, with the immediate crisis managed, Melissa prepared to leave. At the elevator, she turned to me one last time. "You seem happy, Rebecca. Truly. Your business, this building." She hesitated. "Kevin mentioned you're seeing someone." "Michael," I confirmed. "It's good, straightforward, honest." "I'm glad," she said, and I believed her. "You deserved better than what we gave you." As the elevator doors closed between us, I felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps its distant relative. An acknowledgement that life continued to unfold for all of us, shaped by but not defined by our worst choices. Outside, twilight settled over the city as I called Michael to explain my delayed arrival. "Emergency at Riverside. Rain check on dinner?" "Already handled," he replied warmly. "I'm bringing food to you. Thai or Italian?" His uncomplicated consideration warmed me. "Thai. And Michael, thank you for being exactly who you say you are." Later that evening, surrounded by property reports and remediation plans, Michael and I ate takeout in the Riverside management office. He'd rolled up his sleeves to help review contractor estimates, his practical knowledge proving invaluable. "Interesting running into Melissa today," I commented, reaching for another spring roll. Less dramatic than I might have expected. Michael studied me thoughtfully. "How did it feel, seeing her here, in your building?" I considered the question, carefully. "Like watching a movie I've already seen. I remember the plot, but the emotional impact has faded." He nodded, understanding without pressing. It was one of the qualities I valued most about him, his ability to acknowledge complexity without needing to simplify it. "You know," he said after a moment, "most people would have used their position as landlord very differently in your situation." "I considered it," I admitted. "The monthly inspections, the strict enforcement of every lease provision, it was all deliberate at first. But eventually I realized controlling their living situation wasn't helping me build mine." Michael reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "For what it's worth, I think that realization is what makes you exceptional. Not just in business, but as a person." As we finished our meal and prepared to leave, I took one last look around the Riverside management office. This building, purchased as an instrument of elaborate revenge, had ultimately provided something far more valuable than the fleeting satisfaction of control. It had given me independence, professional success, and most importantly, perspective. Sometimes the most unexpected detours lead exactly where we need to go. Sometimes becoming someone's landlord is just the first step toward becoming completely yourself. Kevin returned with damage reports, breaking the moment between us. I immersed myself in property management concerns, authorizing emergency accommodations for displaced residents and expedited repairs. Melissa continued helping contact affected tenants, her efficiency undeniable. As we worked side by side through the afternoon, I found myself observing her with a detached curiosity. The woman who had once been my closest confidant, then my deepest betrayer, now existed in this strange middle ground, neither friend nor enemy, just someone with whom I shared a complicated history. "That should be the last of the affected residents," Melissa said, hanging up the phone. "Everyone has temporary accommodations arranged." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely appreciative of her help despite our history. "Your crisis management skills are impressive." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Interior design teaches you to handle demanding clients and unexpected disasters. Though usually it's more, the custom sofa arrived in the wrong fabric than water is pouring through." The ceiling. The casual exchange felt surreal, this momentary return to the easy conversation we'd once shared, now stripped of its former intimacy and underscored by everything that had happened between us. "Rebecca," Kevin interrupted, "Michael's here. He says you called him about the contractor estimates?" I turned to see Michael in the doorway, surveying the organized chaos of the management office. His presence brought an immediate sense of grounding, my present and future physically entering the space where my past was currently sitting. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, stepping forward with the natural confidence that had first attracted me to him. "I brought those comparison quotes for the remediation work." I introduced him to Melissa, watching carefully as they exchanged polite greetings. There was no awkwardness in Michael's manner. He knew my history with Nathan and Melissa, understood the complexity of our past relationship, but approached the situation with the straightforward practicality that defined him. "Kevin mentioned you helped catch the leak early," Michael said to Melissa. "Probably saved tens of thousands in damage control." "Just happened to be in the right place," she replied, glancing toward me with an unreadable expression. "I should get going. Emma's babysitter is only available until 6. As she gathered her things, I felt a sudden impulse I couldn't quite explain. "Melissa, wait. I'd like to talk with you if you have a few minutes." The surprise on her face mirrored my own internal reaction to the words. This wasn't something I'd planned or even consciously considered. Yet now that I'd spoken, I realized there were things left unsaid between us. Things that perhaps needed saying for my own closure, if not for hers. Michael, perceptive as always, nodded toward the contractor files he'd brought. "I'll review these with Kevin while you two talk." The management office had a small conference room in the back, rarely used except for tenant meetings. I led Melissa there, closing the door behind us to create a pocket of privacy amid the continuing activity outside. "Thank you again for your help today," I began, unsure exactly where I was going with this conversation, but feeling compelled to continue nonetheless. "It was nothing," she replied, standing awkwardly by the small table. "Instinct, really." "Not just today," I clarified. "For how you handled moving out. For respecting the boundaries I set while you lived here." Melissa's expression shifted to something more complex. Relief tinged with lingering guilt. "It was the least we could do, considering everything." I sat at the table, indicating she should do the same. After a moment's hesitation, she joined me, placing her purse carefully beside her like a shield. "I want you to know something," I said, the words forming even as I discovered my own feelings. "Buying this building, becoming your landlord, it didn't begin with noble intentions. I overheard you and Nathan discussing Riverside at a restaurant. When I realized I could purchase the property you wanted, control your living environment without your knowledge, it felt like perfect justice." Melissa nodded slowly. "I figured as much. Once we discovered you owned the building, it was elegantly vengeful." "That was the intention," I admitted. "But something unexpected happened. The control I thought would be satisfying eventually felt hollow. More importantly, focusing on controlling your lives kept me from fully building my own." "Is that why you waived the termination fee? Why you let us leave without complications?" "Partly," I acknowledged, "but also because I realized continuing to punish you was punishing me too, keeping me tethered to the past when I needed to. Focus on the future." Melissa was quiet for a moment, absorbing my words. "I've wondered so many times what I would have done in your position. If I would have had the strength to eventually let go, or if I would have held on to the anger indefinitely." "It wasn't strength," I corrected her. "It was self-preservation. Anger is exhausting." She laughed softly, the sound startling both of us. "Yes, it is." Her expression turned serious again. "Rebecca, there's something you should know. Nathan and we're in counseling, have been for months. Not because we're unhappy, but because we know our relationship began with betrayal, and we don't want that foundation to poison everything we build. This revelation surprised me. In my darkest moments after discovering their affair, I'd imagined them living in uncomplicated happiness, never troubled by guilt, never facing consequences for their betrayal. The reality that they were actively working to address the damage they'd caused was something I hadn't considered. Does it help? I asked, genuinely curious. Sometimes. It's painful, confronting the harm we caused, but necessary. She hesitated, then added, "The counselor asked us once what we would say to you if we had the chance. I had pages of apologies, prepared. But sitting here now, I realize none of them would be adequate." "Probably not," I agreed. "But I appreciate knowing you've considered it." We sat in silence for a moment, the muffled sounds of the management office activity filtering through the closed door. It was strange being alone with Melissa after everything. Strange, but somehow cathartic. "Can I ask you something?" Melissa ventured after a moment. "Does knowing we struggle sometimes make it easier? That we're not living some perfect, carefree life?" The question was surprisingly insightful, touching on something I hadn't fully articulated even to myself. Not exactly easier, but it makes the narrative more complete, more human. I paused, finding the right words. "I don't wish unhappiness on either of you anymore, but knowing you recognize the impact of your choices, that matters." "For what it's worth," Melissa said quietly, "we do. Every day." Michael knocked gently on the door, opening it just enough to lean in. "Sorry to interrupt, but the remediation contractor needs authorization for the emergency work." "I'll be right there," I assured him, grateful for both his help and his careful respect for the conversation he'd interrupted. As he closed the door, Melissa observed, "He seems wonderful, grounded." "He is," I confirmed. "Straightforward, honest, exactly who he appears to be." "You deserve that," she said softly. "After everything, you deserve someone who brings peace instead of chaos." The sentiment was genuine, I could tell. And surprisingly, I found myself able to accept it without resentment or suspicion. "Thank you, and Melissa. I hope you find a way to build something solid with Nathan, despite how it began. For Emma's sake, if nothing else." She nodded, tears suddenly visible in her eyes. "That's all we want now, to be better than our worst choices." We both stood, the conversation reaching its natural conclusion. This wasn't reconciliation, too much had happened for that, but it was something I hadn't expected to find. A peaceful acknowledgement of our shared history and separate futures. "I should go," Melissa said, glancing at her watch. "The babysitter—" "Of course," I replied, opening the conference room door. As we emerged, I saw Michael and Kevin reviewing repair plans at the main desk. Michael looked up, his warm smile settling something inside me. This was my present. That was my past. The distinction had never felt clearer. "Rebecca," Melissa said as we reached the lobby, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "There's one more thing I need to say. When we were planning to move into Riverside, before we knew you owned it, it wasn't about following you or invading your territory. We genuinely didn't know you were connected to this building." "I know that now," I assured her. "The universe just has a strange sense of irony sometimes." We parted with an awkward nod, neither the warm embrace of old friends nor the cold dismissal of enemies. Something in between, something without a clear definition, but with its own sense of completion. After Melissa left, I rejoined Michael and Kevin to finalize the emergency repair authorizations. Michael's quiet competence complemented my decision-making, our professional partnership as seamless as our personal one was becoming. "Everything okay?" he asked when Kevin stepped away to call the contractors. "Surprisingly, yes," I replied. "Something that needed to happen, I think." He nodded, not pressing for details. Ready to head out once we finish here? I thought we could still salvage our celebration dinner. 2 hours later, seated across from Michael at our favorite bistro downtown, I found myself recounting the unexpected conversation with Melissa. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, I explained, trying to articulate the complex mix of emotions. More like completion, closing a circle that needed closing. Michael considered this thoughtfully. Forgiveness is overrated anyway. Sometimes, understanding is more important. Seeing the full picture, even the uncomfortable parts. Exactly. I appreciated, not for the first time, his ability to grasp nuances without simplifying them. Hearing that they struggle too, that they're in counseling, it doesn't erase what happened, but it changes the narrative I've been telling myself. From villains who got away with betrayal to complex people living with consequences, Michael suggested. Something like that. I sipped my wine, contemplating the shift in perspective. When I bought Riverside, became their landlord, I thought controlling their environment would somehow balance the scales. But the real balance came from building something meaningful for myself, this business, this life. I reached across the table for his hand. This relationship. Speaking of which, Michael said, his expression turning slightly more serious. I've been thinking about that conversation we started, about possibly moving in together. And? I prompted, curious about his thoughtful tone. And I'm wondering if we should consider something different. He reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing a small folder containing property listings. What if, instead of choosing between your place or mine, we found something new, something that belongs to both of us from the beginning? The suggestion resonated unexpectedly deeply. A fresh start, a place without history or baggage, just the future we were building together. I like that idea, I said, reviewing the listings he'd brought. Something completely ours. Later that night, walking back to my downtown condo, Michael mentioned casually, "There's a property that just came on the market. Not on these listings yet. A colleague mentioned it today. 3-bedroom craftsman in Magnolia Heights. Might be worth looking at this weekend." Magnolia Heights, the neighborhood where Nathan and I had once lived, where I'd discovered his affair with Melissa. I hadn't been back since selling our home after the divorce. Magnolia Heights, I repeated, testing my reaction to the idea. A year ago, even 6 months ago, the thought of moving back to that neighborhood would have been unthinkable. Too many memories, too much painful history. Too close to old territory, Michael asked perceptively. We can focus on other areas. I considered the question seriously. Did Magnolia Heights still represent the past? Or was it simply a desirable neighborhood where a new chapter might unfold? Actually, I decided, surprising myself with the realization, I'd like to see the house. Magnolia Heights was home for a long time. Maybe it could be again, just differently. Michael squeezed my hand, understanding the significance of this openness to possibility. Different people, different house, different story. Exactly, I agreed. The neighborhood itself never betrayed me. The next morning, I arrived at my office early to find an email from Will Parker, CEO of Evergreen Financial, Nathan's employer, and my former workplace. The subject line read, "Partnership Proposal," and the message outlined an interest in collaborating with Thompson Realty Group on several major development projects. A year ago, such an email might have represented an opportunity for vindication, a chance to return to my former workplace as a partner rather than an undervalued employee, perhaps even becoming Nathan's superior in the corporate hierarchy. Now, I evaluated it purely on its business merits, without the emotional overlay of past grievances. After analyzing the proposal, I drafted a measured response, expressing interest in exploring potential collaboration while establishing clear boundaries about Thompson Realty's independence and autonomy. Professional, strategic, forward-looking, no hint of personal history, influencing the business decision. As I hit send, I realized how significantly my perspective had shifted since purchasing Riverside. What had begun as an elaborately conceived revenge scenario had evolved into something entirely different, a catalyst for professional success, personal growth, and ultimately, a form of liberation from the past that had once defined me. That afternoon, I visited Riverside to check on the repair progress. The water damage was being addressed efficiently, affected residents were being accommodated, and the property continued functioning smoothly despite the temporary disruption. Riverside was no longer the stage for a personal drama, but simply one of several valuable assets in Thompson Realty's growing portfolio. Kevin updated me on the restoration timeline, making no mention of Melissa's visit the previous day. Whatever complicated family dynamics existed between him, his sister, and her husband remained separate from our professional relationship, a boundary I now appreciated rather than exploited. As I prepared to leave, Kevin handed me a small envelope. "This was delivered for you this morning." Inside was a simple card, handwritten in Melissa's distinctive style. "Rebecca, thank you for yesterday's conversation. You showed grace when you had every reason not to. We won't cross paths again unless you wish it, but I wanted you to know that your journey from landlord to the impressive woman you've become has not gone unnoticed. Wishing you every happiness in the life you've built. Melissa." I tucked the card into my purse without comment, neither dwelling on it nor dismissing it. Another small piece of closure in a story that had once consumed my every thought, but now occupied an increasingly appropriate portion of my past. That evening, as Michael and I toured the Craftsman House in Magnolia Heights, admiring its character features, discussing renovation possibilities, envisioning a potential future, there, I felt the final pieces of perspective fall into place. The house that Nathan and I had shared was only 3 streets away, yet it felt like it existed in another lifetime. The woman who had lived there, trusting, unknowing, building a life on shifting sand, was connected to me by experience, but separated by growth. "What do you think?" Michael asked as we stood on the back deck, surveying the garden that sloped gently toward a small creek at the property line. I considered the question, not just about the house, but about everything it represented, returning to familiar territory with new perspective, building something solid in a place once associated with collapse, reclaiming what had value while discarding what didn't. "I think," I said finally, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of possibility, "that sometimes the most meaningful journeys bring us right back where we started, just as completely different people." Michael smiled, understanding as always the layers beneath my words. "So we make an offer?" "We make an offer," I confirmed. "This feels right." As we walked back through the house, this house that could become our home, I found myself reflecting on the strange, circuitous path that had led me here. From betrayed wife to calculating landlord to the woman I was now becoming, each stage necessary, each transition meaningful. The revenge I'd once sought through property ownership had transformed into something far more valuable. The reclamation of myself, the building of a life defined not by what had been taken from me, but by what I had created in its place. Sometimes the most unexpected detours lead exactly where we need to go. Sometimes becoming someone's landlord is just the first step toward becoming completely, authentically yourself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.